Cold open question on this Sunday, April 7th, Brendon Kleen. I'm asking you this question for the cold open in the spirit of it being WrestleMania weekend and also Women's Final Four weekend, and these moments that have superseded the NBA, right? Caitlin Clark, South Carolina, those superseded the NBA. WrestleMania over 2 days in Philadelphia supersedes the NBA and a week before the playoffs. I often also find myself talking to people about the NBA in my life, as I'm wont to do, and unless they are junkies or have a real interest in a team, I sometimes find that the NBA has a presentation problem, and there's sort of like not disinterest, but like apathy towards the product at times. So I ask you this: you're put in charge of a communications campaign, a marketing campaign, a play, like something. You get to change one thing about how the NBA presents itself to the world. Mm-hmm. What could they do better, in your opinion?
This is a big cold open question.
But I am. This is to me. I
have an answer.
First okay,
no, I have an answer.
Okay, let's go.
My answer is shorten the season. I mean, that's not a marketing campaign. That's not a brand management solution. That's not something a PR team would put together for you. That is a league to the bone adjustment, alteration, revolution of whatever this whole thing would look like, but it's the answer. Shorten the season. Make every game matter more. Tell fans the commitment is less than it is right now. Get them more interested in each individual time that they're buying a ticket or tuning in. And I would imagine that would go a long way. It's not the only thing, but that would be my first one for sure.
I have two. Number one, I often think I'm going to be very blunt about this because it's been a pet peeve of mine for years. I think the in-arena setup, maybe it's just because the Cleveland one's so over the top, I think it often sucks. I think the NBA is not good at actually presenting basketball. You go to an NBA game and you're overwhelmed by sensory. You're overwhelmed by edited rap music and t-shirt cannons and merchandise and collaborations and gimmicks in game.
You sound 200, but my question would be, is that different elsewhere? Are other sporting events dramatically different than that? Because I go to college basketball games, I go to NFL, I go to all sorts of sports games. I live in a city where no one can get enough damn sports. We have the freaking Final Four here, and we're going to have the women's WNBA All-Star game. And I don't feel like when I'm at an NBA game, I'm a fish out of water in some really extreme in any kind of direction. I don't feel that.
I think in other environments, you're allowed to sit with the sport more organically. And I think some of that is like a sound production thing, because during the NBA, you're playing music the whole time. Let me just hear the squeak of a sneaker. Let me hear the ball.
You want it to be silent in an NBA arena.
No,
that is,
I'm not saying
that is
silent.
A take.
I'm not saying
you want it to be
silent.
What then?
I want it to just be like I'm like watching something that is happening and not something that is like generating I don't need noise every single second. I need like we just need something that grounds it more in like what is happening in times where I feel like we are like, it is just so revved up. I just think it's like overdone. Okay. Some of that might be
What's
Cleveland,
your second
because
one?
we have Cleveland.
No, people say that about Phoenix too.
The Cavs have notably. The Cavs also have a fucking Jumbotron that shoots fire out of it. We don't need that. Like, we just don't. Like, I'm sorry. We don't need that. Or if you're going to do it, like, let's make the entrances, like, a bigger deal and, like, present the players' stars. The other part of it is I think the NBA has actually kind of gotten bad, and some of it might just be the players and the era of media we're in. I don't think the NBA is as good as building individual stars anymore. I really don't. I don't know. I don't think, like, the way that I think the NBA was in a really lucky place 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, in the way that Steph Curry, LeBron James, the late great Kobe Bryant, I think Durant to a degree, you had a class of superstars that really cared about being ambassadors for the NBA. Of like the current great guys, Giannis is, and maybe Ant, but in a different way, and he's kind of young and he's got to grow into a different version of it, I think. A lot of the really great players you have in the league now are not, I think, as interested in being full-on ambassadors for the league in a way that I think helps the league.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you're saying a version of, it feels like you're just taking your turn getting riled up about what I was mad about on All-Star Weekend when you weren't necessarily all the way there. So we agree.
And I've been worked. Yeah, I've gotten to that place where like I'm watching how. I mean, frankly, some of this is just it's like a Caitlin Clark thing, and just how like she I think understands her presence. I don't think a lot of any NBA guys either understand it or like care.
That is so apples to oranges. She understands that she's a trailblazer, a pioneer, somebody that has to handle that moment and brought it upon the sport she plays. I think the exact reason that the NBA doesn't necessarily have that is because what are you asking of an NBA player right now to kind of uphold or spread the gospel of? Hey, let's keep the money rolling. I mean, it is a kind of a plateau moment, and I think the Stars' personas and their public commentary suggests that. I think you want to avoid allowing that plateau to start going downhill, and I think that's what you want players to maybe have a little bit more of an awareness of is, hey, this isn't just a given. Look at baseball, look at boxing, these sports. I mean, obviously those are for different reasons, and boxing is a violent sport and all that stuff, but cultures don't care about the same shit forever. And so just, I guess, like, assuming that's going to last, you don't want players to get too comfortable. But Caitlin Clark she's a phenomenon. She's a one-of-a-kind first thing ever like her. So that's different,
Sure. I just think there's something off, and I can't, like, totally put my finger on it, but those are the two things that just feel like places I would explore. I think the games thing is part of it. I think that's certainly one of it. Something is just off when, like honestly, the De'Aaron Fox thing also is crawled on my head about this because I'm like, I don't understand. Like, you get out of this, you're trying to connect with people by like just being like annoyed. You have to like talk.
Yeah, De'Aaron Fox saying that going to the media is not a form of leadership. He doesn't get shit out of doing it. Yeah,
it's like, what are we doing? Like, there's something just off here, and I think the NBA is going to have to reckon with itself at some point. I'm curious to see if they have the ability to like look inside and figure that out. I don't know. I honestly sometimes, Brendan, wonder if they do. All right, coming up on today's show, Joel Embiid is back, and there might be an opportunity for him in the Eastern Conference to do some damage. We're also going to wrap up the NCAA Women's Tournament. That's all coming up today on the Just Basketball Show. Welcome in. I'm Chris Manning. That is Brendon Kleen. It is Monday, April 8th. We are here the day of the men's final, or the day after the women's final, and we're here for another episode of the Just Basketball Show 3 times a week here. Wes Goldberg is joined us. Brendan and him will have you covered midweek on Wednesday's show. I want to tell you about our friends at Thrive Fantasy. Thrive Fantasy is a player prop DFS platform where you can pick more or less on your favorite players across multiple sports, including the NBA and the NFL. Sign up today with code JustBasketball, and Thrive will match your first deposit up to $250. Brendan, Joel Embiid is back to you in the little bit he's played, and I believe Philly lost to the Spurs without him on Sunday, so good job, Philly. How has he looked? What have you made of him returning to the lineup after his long absence?
Yeah, Philly is up in double overtime right now. I thought they were going to lose that game too, but they have rallied back. Tyrese Maxey has 52, so let's not bury them there. But I think where I'm at with the Sixers, almost before we get to Embiid and this game being another one without him as he just rests on the second night of a back-to-back, the roster has really come together as a roster that could use a Joel Embiid type player in it, is how I feel about them right now. I mean, I think Batum has been a hand-in-glove fit. I feel like Buddy Hield makes a ton of sense given the way that Embiid has had success with Seth Curry and J.J. Redick in the past, Marco Bellinelli all those years ago. And Maxey, we know the story there. Oubre has progressed into a little bit more of an efficient scoring creator. They have a good backup center. So when you talk about how high the Sixers can go and whatever their standings fate might be and how they might look in a play-in game and all the kind of questions that are swirling, I think it's important to just put it that the rest of this machine is ready to go. And so Embiid is kind of the only piece. And that's not always the case with these injuries. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, Maxi's been playing terribly because he's only good when Embiid's out there, or they have nothing at center, so they need Embiid. None of these things are really true of this team. You could pick some nits. There's some holes. They're not a perfect squad, but that's how I feel. So getting to the Embiid part of it, I think he's looked significantly better and been able to handle more of a workload than I would have expected, given that a week ago when we were recording, we did a whole segment about Embiid, and I was saying if he can't play this week, basically I would consider packing the whole thing up and just letting him rest and not overdoing it with forcing him back. He came back the next game after we talked, and he's kind of clicked right into the type of role we expect. He is a playmaking hub for them again. He is scoring at all three levels. He is walking the ball up the court and initiating like the alien that he always has been. He is, probably picking his spots on defense, but still making some impact plays. And yeah, he looks tired. He had a really high turnover game on Saturday night, but I feel like it's kind of all you could ask for, given that now they have this period to ramp him up from there. I think we have to be looking at Philadelphia as a group that is really coming together and is not going to be a typical 7, 8, even 6 seed, which is where they'll end up finishing.
There's also just, I think, Brendan, to your point, a lane in the East because he is playing well. I think that is where I've ended up with this, because if you look at what is going on in the East, there's not another team that I'm like, hell yeah about right now, aside from Boston. Like, Boston is Boston. They are 62 wins. They can coast to the end of the regular season and probably through the first round, even if they, we'll see if they get Philly or something, but, they're in a good spot where you feel like they are the prohibitive favorite to come out of these. They might as very well win the title. They will have, of the top regular season teams from either conference, they will have perhaps the easiest path you would think to get to the finals, and maybe that gives them an advantage at some point, right? You run on the rest of the list. The Bucks have lost 4 in a row. They're 3-7 in their last 10. Mm-hmm. The Orlando Magic are 6-4 in their last 10. They've won a meager 1 game in a row.
Franz Wagner injured his ankle on Sunday, so that is a question mark now.
Yep. The New York Knicks got OG Anunoby back, but Randall's out for the year. I don't think they fully have their mojo as of yet. Their win is against the Bucks.
Well, let me ask you that, rather than just going team by team. We know they all have questions. Do you feel like, because I think we would all agree, if you're saying Boston is a clear first, which they are, maybe you're of the opinion Milwaukee doesn't even belong as a clear second. I think I would agree there, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That's where they are in the standings. My question would be, and this might be a first-round matchup that we get right in a couple of weeks, New York or Philly? Which team do you feel better about, given they both have injury questions, they both have depth questions as far as, maybe their scoring punch or different positions you could pick nits at or whatever? Which of those two teams right now would you feel better about in a playoff environment to go further, to beat each other head-to-head, whatever the case may be?
Give me Philly. Give me Philly at this point, right? Joel Embiid plus Tyrese Maxey is a better 1-2 combo than what the Knicks are going to throw. The offensive structure with the pieces they built with Buddy and everyone else that was already there or that they've brought in, even with Tobias Harris just being one of the most underwhelming players in the entire NBA on a consistent basis, that team's offense makes lots of sense. It works. Nothing is a concern, right? With the Knicks, it's okay, are you going to go into without Randall, who maybe is already in if you playoff fit at that? You can't even work yourself into a shoot over RJ Barrett and his ability, right? That's a whole thing. So you have all these questions, and it's all right, Jalen Brunson has been superhuman. Is that going to translate when we saw it kind of die in the playoffs last year? And are you going to be able to bank on anyone consistently as the number 2 on that team?
Jalen Brunson's offense did not die last year. He pushed the eventual conference representative in the finals to 6 games. I felt better about him coming off the playoffs even than after the awesome regular season he had.
I just mean it got you to a point, and it's couldn't get you any further, and I don't know what else is different this year. That is my point. What is different with the way their health is, unless DiVincenzo gets hot, unless Bojan, who doesn't play that much, comes in. Whatever it's going to be, is there another lever they can pull that makes them qualitatively different than last year? It doesn't feel like it. So Philly with Embiid, with Maxey, with the pieces that fit, I think with Nick Nurse as a head coach versus Doc Rivers, I think the path is there. That would be like the number 2 team I'm worried about if I'm Boston in the East. It's Philly. It's not the Bucks who are goofy. It's not any of these other teams. I think it has to be Philly, even with the caveat of like, do they have enough time to pull it together? Is Embiid going to like actually stay healthy? Like all the things you could say. Do they have the wing defenders even to defend a Boston? Like that's still the team that I would say is the number 2.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think you know that I'm really high on Philly. I made the case heading into the season that they were going to be good enough to be in this conversation. They obviously made a significant trade. I thought they just wouldn't even have Harden. I was just saying it's a wash. I didn't even know about Batum and whatnot. They haven't even had Melton, and I still feel really good about it. So I'm right there. I think New York, you're kind of underselling them. I feel good about both teams. That's why I threw them both out there. But I think as far as the Sixers go, this season, they have a 121.2 offensive rating with Joel Embiid on the court and a 112.3 defensive rating. So for context, that defensive rating is about what Minnesota is with Rudy Gobert on the court. In one player defensive rating on numbers can be misleading. It's actually a good bit worse than, I think it's actually equivalent to like Jared Allen in Cleveland is the better comp there. And then offensively, you're talking about, close to some of the best hubs in the entire NBA. Denver with Jokic on 123.6. So you're in that stratosphere. You're in the Shea on in Oklahoma City, Luka on in Dallas type of stratosphere. So you're talking about one of the best impact on-off guys offensively and defensively. That's why he was going to be the MVP. And the fact that the other stuff is there, let me ask you this. Do you feel better right now about Tyrese Maxey as a number 2 than you did this time last year about James Harden as a number 2? Given Maxey is smaller, he's younger, he hasn't gone through these reps, even though Harden has his warts. Transport yourself back 12 months. A Robin to Embiid's Batman, Maxey versus Harden, what feels better to you?
Thinking about this hard, Brendan.
Can hear it. I can hear the thinking.
I'm going to go Maxey because of the speed differential. The speed and what he can unlock with the turbo boost and his ability to get up and down the floor and not want to kind of play one very specific way. Even though, Harden had some, to his credit, Harden did some amazing things in the playoffs last year. It just ended in a very weird spot, and then everything imploded because that's what happens with James Harden teams. Maxey, I think, with the pace he can play at and some of the willingness to just go for it and not have to be the super methodical version of it, I kind of like that, particularly just as a counter to Embiid, right? I felt like towards the end with Harden and Embiid, even though Harden had great moments of throwing it back and figuring it out, I think he got at his best when he had this kind of counterweight to himself to kind of anchor what he wanted to do with Embiid, and they kind of ended up playing at the same pace in a lot of ways. I like that Maxey and Embiid can operate at different paces, and it gives you a different look. That's the way I would answer that.
Yeah, Maxey has elements of Harden to his game, just, the pull-up three-point shooting. He's not as good of a passer, but probably serviceable enough, and also has elements of those healed Redick, Curry type players in that he can play a little bit of that dribble handoff game. He's not as dominant on the ball. He can start possessions running off a screen and use that shiftiness to his advantage. So I would say Maxey as well. So, to go back to the numbers.
Well, and just as a point, it's not like Harden was such a, I don't even know if you would even, maybe just because he's bigger and can defend guys in the post, you would say he has more defensive utility. It's not like you traded out similar players for a guy who is much better on defense. There's not actually a qualitative difference there.
Sure, and the other thing is, right, maybe you would say Maxey is a slight negative as a defender because of those deficiencies you mentioned, namely his size.
Yeah.
He was here last year, so he was still on the court, right? So now you're going from Harden gone, and you're replacing that most of the time with, ideally it would be Anthony Melton. We talked about last week, it doesn't sound like we can count on him playing, but even when he's not in there, you're talking about a Kyle Lowry who's still a good defender at his age, or Oubre who's at least bigger. I mean, Oubre versus Harden as a defender, you're kind of picking the better of two evils there. Hield is not as good, so maybe it's a wash, but it's at least role players, specialists, guys who you're not counting on offense, who you could hope would at least execute on defense. I think you like the coaching staff better. So I think we're at a point where if Embiid can get there, and the number I was going to mention is with both of them on the court, Embiid and Maxey, you're getting close to a 125 on offensive rating. And that is, probably one of the better numbers you can find in the league of two guys together. Maybe, Jokic Murray would be certainly one. I don't know how Luka Kyrie looks, but if Embiid can get close to the form he was at in December and January before the injury, I don't see a reason why this team can't compete with everybody. And we'll talk about Boston, I think, once we have more data. There's no real reason, although I guess Philly could fall to 8 technically still here. But everyone else, I would be thinking long and hard about picking the Sixers. That's where I'm at personally, because he's just looked comfortable and he's been playing decent minutes. I mean, we've seen hampered Joel Embiid. It happens every year around this time. He doesn't look like that to me. He looks like guy coming back from injury and forget what his name is in his history, and we're just kind of watching him work himself back, and that feels better, frankly, than what it could have been.
I will add this too. Let me ask. Let's thought exercise to end this segment. Here's the people the teams that in some way, shape, or form I have confidence in. It's a list of 3. It's Boston, obviously, just like they're great. Then it's Philly, and then it's the Knicks. Despite what my concerns about the ceiling, I think they're going to be super functional, and Brunson whips, and like they have all the good role players that make them a nightmare. Orlando's just really young. The Cavs are absolutely crap now, and if Cavs Knicks is potential on the table again, and I personally want it just so the Cavs can get taken out behind the back and taken out like Old Yeller. The Pacers we know what they are. The Heat just have they do this every year, but there's just the engine. Like last year, at least the engine had gotten started, and they were going 25 and getting ready to merge onto the highway and go. Now it's is the car out of the driveway? Does Jimmy Butler know how to drive stick? Yeah. I don't understand. It's done. It's done.
I heard you guys talk a little bit about Miami with Wes the other day because of the Julius Randle conversation, and the thing that I end up yelling into my car and nobody hears it when I'm listening to podcasts, and not just you guys are talking about Miami and doing this whole thing, which they've forced us to do. I'm not saying it's the wrong conversation to have. You cannot make yourself look like an idiot with this team anymore and completely discount or eliminate them or write them off. However, Jimmy Butler last season, you could have made a statistical case, was the best season of his entire NBA career. His efficiency was off the charts. He was consistent. He was available. And in the clutch was a killer. None of that is true anymore. Jimmy Butler is having one of the worst seasons of his career. They are not as good in the clutch. And as a result, I think everybody feels a lot worse about them. So, yeah, you could tell me Caleb Martin goes on a month-long heater like he did against the Knicks and the Celtics, and frankly should have been the conference finals MVP and was one of the better players in the Knicks series too. And I have no argument because the Heat are sorcerers. But their best player looking a lot worse is, I think, a great reason to treat them as less of a threat. So I'm going to go ahead and keep doing that. So I think Philly is a much better team than Miami right now.
Yeah, we're in full agreement. I think it's those 3 teams, and there's just a bunch of other stuff that I'm just like, okay, you had to varying degrees interesting seasons. Time for us to think about you as off-season teams, and perhaps trade Donovan Mitchell to one of those teams.
There we go.
All right. I want to tell you about our friends at Homage. Homage is the ultra-comfortable specialty apparel company with NBA and WNBA licenses that uses vintage-inspired designs to pay homage to the greatest stories, traditions, and figures across sports, music, and pop culture. Brendan has their Las Vegas Aces Championship tee on. You can get that, a ton of other great stuff from them over there. Use our link below to make your purchase and support the Just Basketball Show. All right, the NCAA Women's Tournament has come and gone, Brendan. South Carolina does it again. This championship game started out as well as it could have for Caitlin Clark in Iowa. It got to a place where she was absolutely cooking. You had texted me, I if you don't want me to say this, okay, I apologize. I'm going to say it anyway. 50 was on the table for her with the way she played. She was awesome. And then South Carolina looked like an undefeated 38-0 basketball team that is incredibly well coached, that even with not the defining star player, a la like an Asia Wilson or Alina Boston that they've had the last couple of years, just were better from start to finish, better at most every spot on the floor, everything managed to perfection by Dawn Staley. This team is awesome. That is the best team in the country, and I feel silly, Brendan, for ever thinking that they were not going to be the ones to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. They earned every bit of this, and I'm not embarrassed to say, I mean, she was on pace for 72, so I mean, saying 50 is, I think, where all of our heads were. She was looking like she could do that until Raven Johnson happened, is really where this went, Chris. Like, Raven Johnson checks in, a relatively, lesser known of South Carolina's players. She's not flashy like Fulwiley. She's not big and efficient like Cardoso, but she turned this game in a way that LSU did not have the personnel to do or the game plan to try, in a way that even Nika Mule, who I think earned a lot of admirers on Friday night as she heads into the WNBA draft, did a good job, right? But I think Raven Johnson did it even better. And the reason being, I think where Mule or even West Virginia, frankly, in the first round of this tournament for Iowa, were able to maybe force Caitlin a certain direction, body her, make her drive, make her adjust, right? South Carolina prevented her from getting the damn ball after the first quarter. Like, they reduced her impact because of the help that they were giving and what Raven Johnson was doing, face guarding her and just denying passes. So that's why I think this game ended up being a pretty comfortable win for South Carolina. We can get to some of the other offensive reasons why, but Raven Johnson, 1 of 11 from the field, 37 minutes played, and yet I feel like she might be second only to Cardoso in terms of the players that I would list of reasons why they won this game. So a huge tip of the hat to them for executing all of that, for her doing it. And I mean, on the South Carolina side, Chris, I said this to you heading into, I think, the Sweet 16, if not maybe last week, and I can't remember. I said they're going to need their guards to step up.
You did.
The Gamecocks. And it was obvious because they got a little lucky in terms of their draw. Not lucky, they were the number 1 overall seed. That's what happens when you earn your way there, right? But they put up 91 and then 88 in the first 2 rounds. After that, they play pretty close games against Indiana and Oregon State. Not anybody's idea of dominating. Probably nobody, could really name one of their players, probably, if you are a casual college hoops fan. And that happened in this game. They did not play as close of a game against NC State or Iowa because their guard stepped up. Fulwiley was incredible. Pow hit her threes, and then Tessa Johnson had an absolutely incredible game, playing like, she's been here 6 times. Like, she's been, in Dawn Staley's right-hand seat for all of it and just stepped onto the court like it's been, her 8th Final Four or something, and she's a freshman. So they got what they needed from so many of these component parts, and they needed it. They really did, because you can't beat Iowa 59-55. That was not going to be on the table. And they performed like they needed to beat a really high-powered offense and a superstar player. And that is a huge challenge even for an undefeated team.
Cardoso, I think, is where I want to go with this next, because the number one thing, Brendan, that I felt, if you're going to distill like what worked for them versus what didn't work for Iowa, was her. I was texting with a family member who's watching this game, who just isn't super familiar with. They're the Shaq meme, but for Kamilla Cardoso. Like I wasn't familiar with her game until today, and they were like, "She's fucking huge." Yeah. Like, she is just like this commanding monster presence on the inside of the floor, and it looked like it is one of those moments where it's like we get this in men's basketball sometime. But the centers sometimes
the national championship game. It's Edie and Klingon. Yeah, I mean it's happening right now.
It's just these like monster human beings, and her just Hannah Stolke has literally like no shot physically against Cardoso inside. Cardoso could have just because they just like we're like we have like no way to deal with this sucks like even though you're one of our best players, really important. This just size-wise is you're absolutely getting wrecked out of this game.
Yeah.
When that happens and you see her get comfortable, and even she was only 7 of 14 from the field. It wasn't like she played this like uber efficient game. She's 1 of 5 from the free throw line. Her presence alone and what she did on the glass on both ends was masterful. And it is something that at the center of everything they did, I think perhaps we underrated, or at least I did after we talked about some of the guard issues. I felt the way she gave them like something to lean on if they didn't have perfect stuff elsewhere. It's a testament to her. It's a testament to how good she is. It's a testament to Dawn Staley for understanding that. But on top, you can say a bunch of other things about how South Carolina won. Cardoso's just sheer presence and size was something I maybe just never was going to overcome. They just never had that size to deal with that, and there's not a way you can game plan around that. You can game plan around a bunch of other stuff. You could try zone, all that stuff. Against that particular thing, there is nothing that Lisa Bluder could draw up to be like, yeah, I got it. I got this.
Yeah, there might be not a soul on the floor who I felt worse for, despite, Caitlin Clark ending her career without a championship, and Lisa Bluder, most likely that was going to be her best shot. And, she's been at Iowa for a long time, and all the other things you could say. Than Addison O'Grady. That is the name of the young woman who was put in for Stolke and was, in my opinion, probably even less of a match for Cardoso, despite her maybe, strength compared to Stolke and experience potentially. I don't even know what she is. If she's a junior, he has one year on Stolke, who's a sophomore. So, yeah, it was chopped liver, and I think you saw it in the NC State game, right? Cardoso goes on like a personal 12-0 run in the first half of that game. It's fairly close at halftime. We think she might get hurt or be out or whatever. Comes back in the third quarter. NC State overloads to take that away. She starts dishing it. They move the ball, and their shooters come alive. And that was kind of the beginning of the trend that continued into this game. So, yeah, it's something that can't be stopped, but I also feel like Cardoso, I've come to appreciate her as a player, but also as a prospect more in this tournament than I did going into it, Chris, personally, because I think that her touch and her mobility and her footwork are better than the many players like this in a summer now as we head into NBA offseason talk, where we are going to be debating where Zach Edey should go and if he's an NBA player and what he can do. We know this song and dance, and it's the same in the women's game. You have to have a certain floor of athleticism to be able to make it. And I think she has that in a way that is really promising for her, and it showed in a lot of these games. She's not just a dump it off and pray type of player and, hope she's just bigger than everybody. She has a little more to her game. But the point I want to make about the offense here that she plays into in a way that even Aaliyah Boston was so overburdened last year, and Cardoso having the ability to play off of her teammates and a little bit more balance to this roster. I want to go through last year. South Carolina lost to Iowa in the Final Four last year. Their final scores for themselves, I'm not even going to say the opponent's score, 72, 76, and then in the Sweet 16, they scored 59 in a win. They had a nice game against Maryland, 86, and then back down to 73 against Iowa. This year, 91, 88, 79, 70, and now 78 in this game. Almost every single game they played in this tournament had a higher score than their best games in last year's tournament. And I think a lot of credit should go to Dawn Staley for realizing maybe it had to be Caitlin Clark to shove it in front of her. I think South Carolina probably would have lost to LSU last year too. For rebuilding the roster, rejiggering her approach, and empowering some of the young talent who she realized had to be part of that answer, and putting together an offensive attack that I think it might even be better next year, so I'm not willing to put a cap on it right now, but this felt like the best offensive team Dawn Staley has ever had in terms of that balance, in a way that even Asia Wilson or Aaliyah Boston, who are probably better players than anybody on this roster, ever got to as a ceiling. And that's huge. That shows the evolution you have to have as a coach overseeing a kind of a dynasty program.
She is like, if you're telling me I had a blank check to hire a coach to start a team, college, pro team, whatever, she's top 3 in my, she's on my short list of people I'm throwing the money at. You know what I mean? It's not even close. Yeah. She can do everything. She connects with players. She understands her teams in these ways that is, Brendan, you and I have watched so much basketball and covered teams. You kind of know when a coach doesn't know what actually makes their team run to a certain degree, right? We kind of learn. You kind of you can tell. I never doubt that with Dawn Staley. Even if there are things that maybe she doesn't always get done right perfectly or whatever, she understands the core identity of her team and connects with them in these very beautiful ways that allows for something like this. That allows her team to have not great guard play, and guess what? The offense works. She makes these adjustments, and it sets this team up for the future, right? It sets this team up for the future, where you're going to have a world where these players are going to get better, these players are going to get stronger, these players are going to get to a place where when Cardoso is gone next season, they can fill in some of the void that she's leaving behind. That's a beautiful thing and really hard to do. Not many coaches are capable of that kind of coaching job to allow for that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it just happens, right? It's about who do you recruit, and I think it was inevitable that even if Mylasia Fulwiley didn't impact the team as much as she was able to this year, this team was eventually going to be built in her image. A full court speed bug guard, people call her Kyrie Irving or whatever. You can see the Ja Morant in her game. She had the behind the back in this game that I was like, holy shit. She did it in crowded lane, and I was like, what? And she pulled it off. It didn't totally pull it off, but it looked sick. Yeah, and so that was going to happen either way, but I think there is a lot of credit that still has to be given for not being stubborn. I mean, we have college coaches out here like John Calipari, whose whole thing is they actually don't really have a scheme, and they just want to be friends with Enes Kanter or whatever. That happens, and so
Enes freedom, Brendan.
Enes freedom. Sorry, so. That ability to evolve and adjust is huge. They're probably not going to have the same level of center hub next year. I don't know who that's going to be. Their other center is also graduating, and this team feels like it's going to be a little more guard and wing heavy, which I personally prefer. The college game is more post heavy. There's a beauty to that. I love Aaliyah Boston and watching her, but I want to kind of see what that looks like, and the talent is there. So. Yeah, I think we maybe we have to see this go on for longer. I know people, in the same way we were a little prisoner of the moment at times with Caitlin Clark, there is this sort of dynasty thing happening with South Carolina. We got a ways to go, but let's watch it play out. I just think it's cool to watch it change.
Well, can I say something about dynasty? So I think this is an interesting conversation to have. I don't know if it is possible anymore, and I think South Carolina might be as close as we ever get again to a UConn. I do not think we are necessarily going to ever get like a UConn with either the Taurasi Bird era, be it the Brianna Stewart era. I don't think that can exist fully in the same way anymore. I think that the talent
just
gets more
dispersed.
Because of the
transfer portal?
I think there's just more talent, and the talent gets more dispersed, right? Like, players that go to more different places. Like, in a past world, I mean, Caitlin Clark might have, like, left Iowa. She might have gone somewhere else, right? Like, it could have been a whole different story for her.
Well, she wanted to, right? But UConn dropped the ball there. I mean, I guess I hear you, but there are a lot of interesting programs. There's a lot of coaching talent, I think, is one thing for sure. Lindsey Gottlieb and Carol Lawson at Duke and some of these younger former players who are making their own impression felt the same way that Dawn Staley did 20 years ago at Temple. But I still look at the recruiting thing, and I'm seeing a lot of the familiar names. I mean, UConn, the top 5 are going to UConn, South Carolina, Ohio State, UConn, and Notre Dame. Number 6 is USC, which is now probably has to kind of be in that class. So I don't know. I guess I think in the women's game it's a little easier because of the lack of a one and done option. But sure. I also don't.
You can actually build something. You can build something. You can't build anything on the men's side really anymore.
Exactly, but I think
unless
even then,
unless Zach Edey is your best, even unless Zach Edey is your best player, who he's not an NBA guy, so he stays even though he's good at this. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. I guess in the women's game, I would just, with Dawn, we're on our way there, but let's just kind of enjoy the ride rather than getting all the way to the destination. That's kind of where I'm at. But as far as next year, I mean, they have Full Wiley, Tessa Johnson, and Raven Johnson, and all these players who just stepped up big time in this game, who she gave a lot of credit to post game. So I don't see it slowing down. But we want to talk about Kamilla Cardoso, next level. I mean, I mentioned that I've been really impressed with her. I don't know how you feel.
Oh, 100% exactly. Highly impressed. And Brendan, if you just think about how the WNBA draft is going to go, which we're going to cover in about a week's time, most mocks I have seen, including Jack Maloney at CBS, M.A. Vopel over at ESPN, it's Cameron Brink at 2.
Yeah.
It's Rickea Jackson of the Sky at 3. And then it's Kamilla Cardoso at 4. And get the same team, the LA Sparks, has the 2 and 4 picks. I am really curious to see if this is how this breaks, because I could see a world where someone looks at what Cardoso did in this tournament and says, "I want her at 3." Just says that's someone we can build something with. We'll get the big whatever. Especially in a world where Paige Beckers isn't in this draft. But if I'm the Sparks, having a world, even if they're how this would work, I think would be really interesting. But a Brink Cardoso building block for this new era you're about to go through, I think would be really, really fascinating. I am curious to see what she would look like in that kind of environment with that kind of pairing right off the bat. But I think there's going to be a really productive career for her. Situation dependent, all that stuff is very hard in the W, as you know even better than I do, Brendan. But her as a her floor feels like 4, but could she go 3? And what does the pairing for her, if it is with Brink, what does that look like? I'm curious to see it.
Yeah, when we had Sabrina Merchant from The Athletic on pre-tournament, she talked about this, and she's a Sparks fan, and she felt comfortable with it. So I'm going to defer to her. She knows more about both of these players and that team than we do. I think I mostly feel for what it might mean for Brink. I don't love when players are immediately forced into, can you be a little bit more on the outside? Can you be maybe more of a passer and three-point shooter, or at least jump shooter of some kind than you had been at Stanford, even though she did lean into that more as she aged through that program. So that would be a concern, is the player you're taking first somehow actually is having to adjust more. It will get weird, but it is talent, and you want to build around that. Their coach, Kurt Miller, built around 2 bigs the entirety of the time he was at Connecticut prior to coaching the Sparks. Obviously, Jonquel Jones won an MVP there, and he likes that size, and he is a defense-first type of coach, so that makes sense too. The interesting thing, too, though, is the Chicago Sky are at 3, and they have absolutely nothing on their roster. They are in a complete teardown. Their coach jumped ship to go be an assistant in the NBA, and they traded their best player, Kamilla Cardoso, to my backyard and gave me the opportunity to buy a jersey of hers because I fucking love Kamilla Cardoso. Thank you very much to the Chicago Sky. But that means they're a wild card here, right? What do they see as a building block? What do they see as what they kind of want to latch their anchor to here and hope can guide them to the next steps of building a winner again? That's a unique place to be. It's not let's see how this young player fits with our current, like maybe the Fever have, although they're obviously taking Caitlin no matter what. It's really empty. Is Rickea Jackson what they like, or do they want to go maybe higher ceiling or something like that? I think that's an open question. But yeah, I feel like we have a top 5 in the WNBA draft. I would say it's a top 6 with JC Sheldon. You and I were texting about her a little bit. But where they go in the WNBA is always insane with trades on draft night because roster spots are at a premium. Teams can only afford to roster so many rookies. And, every team is always kind of one trade away from a significant shift in their direction. But I think Cardoso is a very sure bet to be very good on defense, and I feel better about her offense than some of the Tierra McCowans or those types of players that we have seen come through in recent years in the W, who haven't. McCowan has found her way back, but that is a tough thing. I mean, you're talking about a league where the best 2 teams, the 2 super teams, play 5 out. You got to survive in that league somehow. That's not an easy task, but I feel like Cardoso can at least survive in the league long enough to develop, which is more than a lot of players can say.
The part of this that I find interesting, Brendan, maybe you can speak to this because you just covered this league and maybe have a better feel of this. So Curt Miller is a longtime head coach, obviously highly successful. By the way, don't know if you know this, Ohio connection, went to Baldwin Wallace, little D3 school up near me.
Okay.
Obviously, very successful with the Connecticut Sun. He is kind of shepherding a different era for the Sparks. I think that's part of why you go get him. Mm-hmm. When you look at him and the way he plays and what he would want, does 2 bigs like that make sense for him with what that roster is? Is there a world where would he prefer one of Brink or Cardoso for the way he wants to play, and then maybe they make a trade or try to get Jackson to get a score in there? What do you make of that particular situation?
Well, they're pretty bereft of talent right now too. I mean, star talent, right? I think they're in a little bit of a transitional moment, having said goodbye to Nneka Ogwumike. Even Jordan Canada, who broke out there last year, is gone. So they had a success story at a spot, and then they have to now pivot once again. So you're talking about, the best player on this roster, Azurá Stevens, would probably be the answer. She was a role player for the Chicago Sky when they won the championship 3 years ago. So that's where they're at. So I don't know. I mean, I think Brink is just a significantly better prospect, so I would be surprised if they did anything but just take her. And then, maybe they trade for, maybe they do something a little different. I mean, the W draft is weird. It is because of all these questions we're talking about players' futures. So, but if you're asking me just about how he plays, I think that they would be happy to make it work with both of those players, Brink and Cardoso. I mean, Alyssa Thomas was kind of the forward center next to Jonquel. I mean, we know Jonquel Jones can shoot, but that's still two post players and 2 inside dominant players, and they were in the finals multiple times. So I think it would work out okay. I don't know is the answer, but that's why we'll cover it. I have a question as we wrap up with what we learned from the tournament. I have a question before what we learned from the whole tournament, which is to not ignore the sensation who lost. Do you feel like you learned anything about Caitlin Clark in this tournament?
That's a good question. No, I don't. I think it made me raise a question, which I think is going to be very organically answered by the Indiana Fever, which is that I want to see how she plays and what her style looks like when she has another really, really good talent with Aaliyah Boston next to her. Like, she from day one in the W is going to play with someone that's probably, no offense to her teammates at Iowa, probably better than any teammate she ever played with in her 4 years in Iowa, right? Like, I think that's, like, it's not close. Like, all due respect. All due respect. Like, what that means for her and how she plays and how she approaches things, I find that question really fascinating. Is how I would answer that, because I think just seeing how she got pushed in a certain way and what she had to do, I think she kind of played exactly how she needed to for this specific team. So now that she maybe doesn't have to do that anymore, how does she change? How does she evolve? How does she adapt? What does that mean for her? Does she pick her spots like 5% more? I am fascinated by all of that.
Yeah, I think she will. I mean, somebody was bringing this up. All of us, NBA white dude media gathered around the television in the media room before Suns Pelicans were having, really thoughtful dialogue about this sport. And most of that was people tossing questions my way because they see me tweeting about this stuff maybe more than they watch it. And I think that the answer is going to be that she dials up the passing and down the scoring. I think the interesting thing is going to be how fast can you play with Boston? Speaking, the numbers we listed off there with South Carolina's point totals last year, that was with Aaliyah Boston as their best player. That's not a shot at her, but it is just how they played, and that's going to be very different than Caitlin Clark, even if they're a natural pick and roll pairing in the half court. What can you juice the transition the same way? They have a second kind of scoring post player in Alyssa Smith, who's not they played one roller and 4 shooters at Iowa. That's not exactly going to be what they have there, but some of this feels like a draft conversation, so I guess I can save it. My question would be with Caitlin, or what I've learned is, we did see her have to adjust already, right? I said the other night when they were playing UConn that people compare her to Steph, and I think the only thing similar about them is their shooting range. I don't think they play very similarly.
Yeah.
But UConn made her kind of play like Steph Curry plays with the Warriors, which is zigzagging around, running off ball, using screens, starting possessions largely without the ball in her hands, and then finding ways to impact from there. That just gives me optimism no matter what it looks like, right? That she didn't just always do it exactly her way. She got forced to be uncomfortable and kind of won and produced at a really high level anyway. That's really exciting. What did you learn from the tournament?
This is a little big picture. This is a little... it's maybe, again, more in the spirit of asking questions. I don't know what's next for LSU and Kim Mulkey. If Angel Reese is gone, and I know they have returning talent, and they're going to recruit well, they always kind of do. I think there is an evolution to come there. Haley Van Lith is in the transfer portal. I don't think that exactly worked out as they would have hoped, and for her or for the program. I think there is something there to be figured out, because they win a national championship a year ago, and then this year just never from the get-go felt like that was really going to be in the cards again. And they end up losing. They had a good tournament run, but then Angel Reese is gone. That team is going to look different. It's going to require something different out of Kim Mulkey. I just think we are headed towards an LSU that's going to look different and evolve, and I don't know what that looks like, and I think their path back to being like a true blue contender, I don't think quite feels as linear as South Carolina, but also like a UConn or some of these other teams.
Yeah, I hear you. They have 2 players on their roster who are potential lottery picks in each of the next 2 WNBA drafts, and Anissa Morrow and Flau'jae Johnson. So I feel comfortable that if you have that top-level talent and you don't lose it, which no indications are either of those players are going to leave, you're going to be just fine. Now, I think they do need a point guard. It was just a bad fit with Van Lith trying to kind of reel her scoring in and make her a table setter, but they do need that table setter. And obviously they have to figure out their big rotation. They basically only had Angel Reese as any sort of real interior presence. They played like one player off the bench, which was Tier, and she's a guard, and I think she's graduating. So they have a lot of roster spots, whatever they call them in college, to fill, but they have two superstars, and so I guess that gives me optimism.
Yeah, I think that's more than reasonable. I don't think that's unfair or like wrong. I think it is just I think it's just gonna this year just went in a way that made me wonder, okay, how does this look? What does this mean? I think the other part of it too. ESPN had their way too early top 25. I'm seeing if LSU's like even in there.
Yes, they're going to be in there.
Okay.
Right?
They are. I'm rapidly scrolling. USC's number 1. That's actually the other thing, Brendan, is like
LSU's at 7.
Okay.
I opened it.
All right. Okay, you're better than me. Are they? I'm looking at the recruiting class rankings. I don't think they're in the top 25 recruiting class.
Yeah.
That's tough.
So they have a big who's coming back from injury, and they have those players we talked about. So the work is cut out for Kim Mulkey. My lesson would be that I do feel comfortable saying, in spite of the Cooper flag of it all and everything else, that women's college basketball is going to be looked at as an event, at least in March, at least next year too. This is not going away with Caitlin Clark, because you can say that a rising tide lifts all ships. I understand. Take away the crazy ratings bonanza, the way that, Caitlin Clark broke through on all the nonsense ESPN and Fox Sports shows and podcasts that I have to listen to and watch for blog posts at Awful Announcing. The other games, the other stars broke through too. Maybe not as much, maybe not to the same level, but these games were getting 7-8 million people watching them. That is quadruple what an NBA regular season game gets. That is going to be significantly more than most NBA playoff games get. And that was happening for UCLA LSU or USC UConn. I know that has UConn in it. UConn has been really good for a long time. They were not doing those numbers. So it's going to be on media and all that stuff to make Juju what Caitlin has been. I think the Big Ten will help, and we'll have all those conversations as we go.
You mean her games being easier to watch will make it easier for people to care about Juju Watkins? Do
you remember how I had to watch Juju last time we talked? I had to stream it with the VPN on German YouTube. So yeah, I would say the Big Ten is probably easier than that. I just think this thing is here to stay. I'm not going to make any bold proclamations about men's versus women's college basketball or sit here and do the whole, it's a mainstream sport now and whatever. No, I mean, college basketball period is not. So it'd be goofy to say that this is going to change things, but it might not get talked about November through February, but I do. I mean, am I just in the sports media hole, the I really care about women's basketball hole too much, or do you agree?
No, I agree. I mean, I think in a very basic level, I think Paige Beckers had a star tournament. Didn't end well for her, but I think she had a run that is going to make her a star, right?
Yeah,
I think that is going to make her it's going to be her and I think Juju and some other players that are kind of the face of the tournament next year, and that is also a blue blood program that I think people understand. And you bring in Sarah Strong, and they're one recruit in the country. Fudd's back. You got some other maybe some other veterans that can help. Even if Lee Edwards or Nika Moa aren't there, that roster still should be really good. That team's really good. Everyone kind of knows what UConn is about. They understand the brand of UConn in a way that I think will help them. I think that's going to be a really big deal. I think they are just primed to just kind of take over that space. And I think particularly like if you could get like South Carolina and UConn like in a Final Four next year or something like that, like sign me up. Like that is like gangbusters waiting to happen. And I do think, Brendan, someone else, maybe it's Juju. Maybe there's someone on a good LSU team. Maybe there's someone that we're not even thinking about yet that kind of pops. That then becomes like another name that we're caring about. Like, or maybe there's a really impactful transfer. Like maybe George Moore goes somewhere and like another team becomes like a star level team. Because I agree with you fully on this.
But I think this speaks to the point, right? Which is people don't just forget this shit. They just watched it for a month. It might be a tall order to ask them to be turning it on. There's shit on our phones, and like I get it. I'm not saying it's a lock. I'm not trying to get over our skis here, but this is all that people have been asking for a very long time, and I will not go on a rant, but like the awareness, the opportunity to have a kick-ass studio show like ESPN put together for this, and time slots that make sense, and national media attention, and all these sorts of things. Yeah, people know who Flau'jae Johnson is, right? Maybe in some corner of their mind that they're not going to think about again until next March. But it's like, oh yeah, the girl who's like super fun and raps and who Kim Mulkey seems to love. I remember her. Yeah, she's playing. I'll turn it on. You know what I mean? So, that other white girl who's like almost as good as Caitlin, I think she goes to that school that wins all the time. Yeah, I'll watch that. You know what I mean? So we're at least there. It's going to take more time, but it's cool because the sport is really fun. It's, in my opinion, vastly superior to men's basketball in terms of just fandom and stories right now, because I don't know who the hell anybody is in men's college basketball, and I know I don't need to care. Here, I got Juju for a few more years, so I'm invested. I'm here. You know what I mean? So hopefully more people are too.
I think that is where this is headed. I'm already excited for next season, Brendan. I got to tell you that I'm excited. Like I'm ready for the W season. I think this year's going to be a really fun year. Caitlin Clark's rookie year, all of that. The Aces, going to continue to make history, all of that stuff. But next women's college season is going to be fun. I think if you had to pick one team that you're just like I'm going to watch. I want to end on this. If you're going to start next season, just like right now, way too early, Brendon Kleen's like team I'm most excited to just watch. Yeah. Would USC be your pick? Would you have someone else?
It's UConn. I mean, we talked last episode that I am a Paige stan. AZ Fudd is incredibly. She is like one of the best shooters I have seen in college in a long time. She makes like 40+% of her threes on high volume. Like that does not happen in college. So she's back, and then they just got the number one recruit in the country. So that is definitely top of my list, but you could pick any. How about you? You got Juju in your backyard now. She's going to come from in my backyard to in your backyard because somehow that's a conference now.
Yeah, I didn't get. I will say I didn't get down to see Caitlin Clark in Columbus this year. I might need to like go down for USC.
If they State. If they play a road game there, yeah.
Honestly, what are we doing? I would say the other team, Brendan, that I'm sort of intrigued by, would be Duke, like number 11 in the ESPN Top 25. They're returning a bunch of players on a pretty young team. Is there just like a leap to happen, and can we get like the blue blood men's program get a rub on the men's side? I think that's not, and I think obviously USC. I think USC is just going to be like all the talent they're adding. We talked about this before with Juju when she got eliminated from the tournament. That team is just primed for something really interesting, and I want to. If that promise could be fulfilled, it's also just like maybe like the easy answer is just like we should just like maybe watch a lot of South Carolina. Like let's not overthink this. Let's just like watch a shit ton of South Carolina. Yeah.
I mean, we praise them enough. We praise them enough. So I was going somewhere else, but absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's end there. Joel Embiid's back. South Carolina went undefeated, did it again. A whole lot more going on in the basketball world with Brendan and Wes Goldberg. We'll have you covered on that later this week. I'm Chris Manning. Enjoy the hoops. We'll talk to you soon.